You say that God is in everything around us. How come everything around us looks so God-forsaken vile? If he made the world, well, I guess the old man cut corners. If there ever was a corner looking down upon a child, but that ain't love up above. And I figure I've seen enough, not the first nor the last.
The gates of hell are open night and day. Smooth is the descent and easy is the way. But to return and view the cheerful skies, in this the task and mighty labor lies. The ancient poet Virgil knew Rome, and you can't understand Jesus without understanding Rome. Not tourism and modern movies, but the hellish world of Jesus before Christianity. And on the podcast, a path out of the coming hell with Jesus after Christianity.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, and we'll venerate something new. Hallelujah, from the long lost ages.
Sinners and saints, is's and ain'ts, friends beyond the binary, welcome back to the Jesus After Christianity podcast. If you want to understand Jesus, you have to understand Rome. Economic extraction taxed farmers into starvation so wealth could flow up to the capital. Authoritarian power crucified thousands along Palestinian roads to crush resistance. Religious extremist leaders collaborated with occupiers to protect their own power. That sounds familiar. Jesus After Christianity has an anti-authoritarian playbook that we ought to consider. This podcast is for people who still hunger and thirst for spiritual depth, especially those who've been harmed or pushed to the margins by rigid dogma and religious oppression. Your questions, your anger, your ache for something real, they're welcome here. This isn't church. It's not about getting your theology right. It's not about protecting a tradition. This is about practicing belonging over purity and belief. We're looking at what Jesus actually did and said, not what Christianity made of him later. I'm Ben Collins. With me is my wife, Jo Collins, scientist, software developer, educator, healthcare innovator, and someone who knows compassion, even if she doesn't know the Bible. Jo, in the last episode, we talked about Jesus living in a time of crisis that mirrors ours. This week, we're getting specific about the empire that he confronted. We've talked in the past about confronting systems from schools to healthcare providers. How do you think understanding a system helps you better able to confront it or challenge it?
I think that without understanding the system, it's so easy to blame yourself. It's so easy to find someone to point at and to get angry at instead of actually realizing there's something bigger happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're doing today. We're trying to understand the specific systems that Jesus confronted so that we can recognize our own, because the empire hasn't gone anywhere, right? The flag has changed. It just looks a little different now. Did you know that the Jesus After Christianity podcast is a part of a larger project called the Listening Year? With weekly gatherings in person and online, monthly events, and open resources to listen and practice wherever you are. We're going to spend all year listening. Go to listeningyear.com. I remember one of my first real writing gigs. It was a pretty good speaking gig. It let me travel. I was writing curriculum for a summer camp, and then I'd get to go kind of train the other camp pastors, and I got to be kind of the camp pastor for a few weeks at this summer camp. And I'd been hired to write this curriculum, and the subject that summer was the kingdom of God, and it was, maybe a year or two after I had encountered this book, Jesus Before Christianity by Albert Nolan. And I turned in my first version of the curriculum, and I remember when my friends called me. He was the director. He was a few years younger than me, so it made it super awkward. And he basically said, "We're not going to go with your curriculum because while it's faithful to the Gospels, while it's all about the kingdom of God, it doesn't promote the kind of easy answers and belief salvation that they really wanted. They really wanted altar calls and fear and certainty and purity and belief. But these were things that I had left behind when I encountered Jesus before Christianity." I grew up, maybe a lot of folks can relate, being taught that Jesus came to save souls, to get people into heaven, and that if anything, Rome was just kind of the poor bastards that got stuck doing God's predestined will and they had to kill Jesus. So Rome was just kind of like background noise, historical context, but it didn't really matter because what Jesus had was primarily a spiritual message. But then I read Nolan in his description of Rome's system, the crucifixions, the economic extraction, the religious collaborators, and I realized Jesus wasn't offering an escape plan from this world. He was confronting these very specific systems, crushing people, and he invited them to practice an alternative. And this changed everything for me because suddenly the gospel wasn't about believing the right things so that you could go to heaven someday. It was about confronting systems that were hurting people and practicing solidarity with those people now. We've recently been out, even as soon as last weekend, protesting, doing just this, because like Jesus, we live in a moment where our neighbors are being hurt by these same systems, these same decisions, these same policies all over again. Joe, you work in healthcare. You see how systems can either serve people or extract from them. School systems can either give to students or take from them. Why is Jesus' message of rescue from oppression today better than heaven tomorrow?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that heaven tomorrow gives people an out. You know, it allows people to do whatever they want and to not have any real moral repercussion because they just know they're going to go to heaven anyway because they said the magic words.
Yeah.
And I really think it's a lot more than that. And I think that the message of Jesus is a lot more than that, which is why I'm here, which is why I'm so curious about what that message actually is.
Yeah. So let's name that moment. We're here. We've said this last episode. We've already alluded to it today. Here's where we are in the world. Wealth extraction is accelerating. The gap between rich and poor is wider than it's been in a century. Climate collapse is being driven by the same extraction logic that Rome used. Take everything you can from the land, from the people, concentrate all that wealth and power, and then when the system inevitably breaks, it will be the poor masses who suffer the most. And religion, too often the religious leaders are still collaborating with the empire, right? Today, blessing the systems that are crushing people, using faith to justify nationalism, racism, wealth accumulation, and opposing anyone who stands in the way or stands with the excluded.
And it's not just religion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to point at a church and go, hi, you're doing this wrong.
Yeah.
Not only have I been a part of the healthcare world for a long time, but prior to that, I was part of the public school education here in Florida, of all places. And there's a lot to say about the oppression that exists in our school districts.
Yeah.
There's a lot to say about the oppression that exists in hospital systems with people who need help, who need assistance, who are refused care.
Yeah.
I've been refused care before, and it's appalling. You know, doctors don't become doctors to deny anyone care.
Of course.
And doctors are good people. And I just want to put that out there because I feel like a lot of people, you know, will blame the doctor instead of blaming the system.
Right. The doctor's stuck in the same system.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're the one that's supposed to be helping, but they're also stuck helping within the confines of what is.
Same as teachers.
Which is an extractive economy or an oppressive economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this isn't new. These are the same systems Jesus confronted, whether it's, you know, not hospitals or school systems, but military power, economic extraction through hospitals, religious collaboration. We're seeing that happen in schools now. Empires crushing people, and religion is blessing the system. But here's the thing. Jesus didn't just name the problem. He practiced an alternative, and people experienced liberation, not someday in heaven, but now, right then, in their bodies, in their communities, in their economic relationships. That's still possible. And not because we're optimistic, but because solidarity is actually a thing that works. It's a practice that can pull people together when they share resources instead of hoarding them. Everybody eats. When people cross barriers instead of maintaining them, everyone belongs. When people confront systems instead of blessing them, things must change. And that's what we need. This is the same either-or moment that Jesus faced. And that's why we're practicing, and that's what we're practicing this year. You have a passion maybe a problem you want to solve. You're headed somewhere. Getting where you're going is hard. It's even harder without a guide. Whatever your passion or profit margin, Promised Land Partners is a boutique consulting firm that helps you get where you're going with guidance and solutions on the path to your promise. You can check it out at promisedlandpartners.com. With practical tools like the Activator Launchpad, Tribe Builder, and Financial Positioning System, you can take an important next step on your path. Go to promisedlandpartners.com to get started. Again, that's promisedlandpartners.com. All right, let's get into today's teaching from Albert Nolan's Jesus Before Christianity. For those of you who are just tuning in with us, we're following Jesus before Christianity through whatever religious abomination we're seeing play out now today called Christianity, and we're coming out the other side with Jesus after Christianity. Because what if the things Jesus was saying and doing before Christianity, before the creeds and the power structures and the purity codes, are also the things that provide us with a path out of the current crisis? We need a better understanding of Jesus and a better way to solve our problems. Let's start with that better understanding. Albert Nolan describes the world Jesus lived in with brutal clarity. And I remember when I first gave Jo this book, she was reading through it and she read a chunk of it and gave it back. And she was like, God, this is really dark. It's like very much war and suffering. And it is. Listen to Nolan. Palestine was occupied territory. The Roman army was everywhere. A visible, violent reminder that Caesar ruled, and resistance would be crushed. Crucifixion wasn't just execution. It was political theater designed to terrify anyone who might challenge the system. Thousands died along Palestinian roads, their bodies displayed as warnings. That's the world Jesus entered, not a neutral stage for a spiritual message, not 1990s capitalism of my youth where you can either believe and go to church or you can just go to the mall and be happy. This was a system of domination held in place by state violence. So the first thing I want us to think about is that Roman occupation meant systemic crucifixion. And here's what most of us weren't taught. Jo, you didn't grow up in the church, so you didn't hear this. But even those of us that did grow up in the church, or a lot of people who were given crucifixes to wear around your neck, crucifixion was Rome's preferred method of dealing with slaves, rebels, and anyone who threatened their imperial order. It wasn't rare. It was routine. It was very normal. When Spartacus, and this is not Kevin Sorbo, again from my childhood, when the real Spartacus led a slave rebellion, Rome crucified 6,000 people along the Appian Way, one every 40 yards for 120 miles.
Oof, that's awful.
When Judea resisted Rome, thousands more died the same way. I think that was Judas Maccabeus a couple hundred years before Jesus. The important thing is that these weren't about individual crimes, right? Rome wasn't going out and hunting down criminals. This was state terror. This was designed to crush collective resistance, to crush hope. The message was clear. If you challenge the empire, this is what will happen to you. So when Jesus is crucified, his death is not unique. What is unique about it is who he was and why they killed him. He was executed for practicing an alternative to empire, for organizing people around solidarity instead of domination. Jo, when you hear this, that Jesus' death can be understood as political execution and rather than cosmic sacrifice, how does that change the way that you kind of frame the way you've engaged Christianity?
A lot of people look at that cross and they relate it with Jesus.
Yeah.
And they don't relate it with the thousands of victims of this kind of state violence, of this kind of government violence.
Yeah.
When we look at the cross as a symbol of government violence, it really changes the narrative quite a bit.
Yeah.
Looking at it from a different perspective, I think is always healthy.
Yeah. And that's, that I wore a cross for a long, long time. Like, I think, the perspective of the person wearing the cross from what's in it for me, right? Cosmic salvation versus why do I live in a world where this is possible, right? Where people can be executed and crucified. Yeah, absolutely.
Why did you stop wearing the cross?
That's a great question. I think, probably an internal and unarticulated feeling that sort of became this podcast, that I was having a harder and harder time reconciling, Christianity with Jesus. Actually, that summer camp curriculum that I was just talking about, one of the illustrations that I used, and this could have been why they didn't want me to teach this to kids. But I kind of said, like, would it be weird if we were wearing necklaces with like a lethal injection, thing on it, or like a noose on it? Yeah, a gun,
Yeah.
and it might settle in more. I was living out of integrity, I guess. It didn't feel right. Great question. So the idea is that viewing Jesus' death this way makes his life the point, not just his death, which brings us to the second reality, kind of the second idea about Rome's empire. Economic extraction impoverished the masses. Rome didn't just occupy Palestine militarily. They had this thorough system of extraction in place, systematically, economically, multiple layers of taxation. You had Roman taxes, you had temple taxes, you had local taxes. Conservative estimates say 40%. I've heard people say up to as much as 80%. And here's the brutal logic. You're an occupied, small, middle and nowhere territory. If you can't pay, you go into debt. And if you can't pay the debt, you lose your land. And if you lose your land, you become a day laborer or worse. And so the system's designed to concentrate power and wealth, not to serve people. And in the most extreme cases, people became slaves on their ancestral land that they believed God had given them, working for not enough money for an empire that had taken everything. So when Jesus talks about things like forgiveness and jubilee, economic resetting, he's not being metaphorical. He's seeing his people crushed, everything taken from them, and he's saying the kingdom of God is that they have to get some back. There has to be enough for everybody. So he's naming the specific system crushing people, and he's practicing an alternative. The kingdom he announced wasn't heaven later. It was economic solidarity now. When he said things like, blessed are the poor, he wasn't romanticizing poverty. He was saying God is with the ones being crushed by poverty, by the system. And those who practice an alternative where everyone eats, where everyone belongs, where everyone has dignity, those are the ones who are living in God's kingdom. What are you hearing, Joe?
I'm hearing that we need to stop overtaxing the poor and giving breaks to billionaires.
Yeah.
That's really what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I mean, in today's day and age, I've been working since I was 14 years old. Every year when I pay my taxes, I look at how much I paid versus how much I made, and I land usually at about 20%.
Yeah.
I'm paying 20% of my hard-earned money to our government.
Yeah.
And then when you look at it and you look at what's happening with that money today, right? We look at, remodeling of the White House. That's not what I'm paying for.
Right.
While my neighbors starve
Yeah.
because there's not enough money for food stamps.
Yeah. Mutual aid gets cut and all of that stuff gets cut, the programs. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's disgusting. There's this detail in the Gospels that we usually miss. This story where Jesus feeds 5,000 people. Have you heard this story?
Is this the bread and the fish thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, Jesus feeding 5,000.
Feel free to refresh our memories.
Yeah, for sure. So the story is that Jesus encounters a large crowd. Some say 5,000, some say 5,000 plus women and children. The point is they're out there. It says they get hungry and they don't have enough to eat. And this boy comes and he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. And the story is that Jesus is able to multiply it and feed everybody. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is, and I always thought, this is probably back to my 20s. I always like to imagine Jesus with like a t-shirt cannon with the loaves and fishes, and this crowd, do they all get fed? Everybody has it, and he like magically, whatever, multiplies it. He doesn't just create food out of nothing, right? Which would be great. What a hero. He has people sit in groups, and it even names how large the groups are, which is interesting. And they share what they have. And so the miracle that we're taught is that he can multiply things. But the truth is, it might be that the miracles, when people practice solidarity instead of scarcity, there's actually enough, that you don't need magic, there's actually enough. And I remember, this is probably 20 years ago here, preaching this right in downtown DeLand at a little church that I'd started. And people were made really uncomfortable by this. But I shared so the reason he encounters this group in the wilderness is there's a large pilgrimage that's headed up to Jerusalem for the Passover. This was a very normal thing. They were coming from far away. They wouldn't have planned to travel without food, right? And so probably this is one of the last couple days of the pilgrimage. Food is running short. The poor people are out. The wealthy people packed enough. And so the feeding of the 5,000 is most likely Jesus imploring this group of people, there's enough for all of us. There's enough to share. What a miracle. That's kingdom economics. Not charity from above, but mutual aid from within.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And basic lessons that we teach our children every
Share.
day.
Kindergarten, share.
And when you're 5 years old,
Yeah.
you're taught how to share. How is
Yeah.
it that we grow up and forget?
Yeah. We get afraid. We get protective and self-defensive. All right, the last idea, religious elites collaborated with the empire. This is the part that really gets me. The temple system, the religious infrastructure that was supposed to serve God and serve God's people, was collaborating with Rome. They had a lot of benefits from being in bed with the empire. So the high priest was appointed by Rome. The temple police worked with the Roman authorities. The religious law was supposed to protect the vulnerable, but it got twisted and it made them vulnerable, especially to Rome. So purity codes kept the poor out of worship, right? You didn't have access to God. Legal interpretations protected the wealthy. So when someone like Jesus comes along practicing solidarity with these people who'd been excluded, he's doing things like healing on the Sabbath, eating with sinners, confronting systems publicly, and the religious leaders helped Rome get rid of him.
So you talk about Jesus practicing solidarity. And English isn't my first language. That's
Yes.
actually a word I looked up.
Yeah, hit me.
So solidarity is the unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially amongst individuals with a common interest. And what better common interests do we have than all of us being human and sharing a society and having humanity that we get to share together?
Yeah. What was it last episode? Humanity as a verb, where we all do humanity well together.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love it. Exactly. I think this is why Jesus is, because it seems so common sense, right? Like so that's why I think Jesus' sharpest words are for the religious leaders, actually, not for sinners, right? He calls them hypocrites. He calls them blind guides. He calls them whitewashed tombs because they're using religion to justify oppression instead of to confront it. And that's the world Jesus lived in: military occupation, economic extraction, religious collaboration, an empire that crushed people while religion blessed it.
Sound familiar?
Yeah, you said it. All right, let's see this tension come alive in the text. This is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me, listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow. And on the third day, I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day, I must be on my way because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem." Whether or not English is your first language, that's kind of a weird passage. It doesn't read super clear. Basically, Jesus is saying, I'm here busy doing the real work. It's kind of there's a lot of humor in the passage. He says, I'm busy here doing the work, but let me rush up to Jerusalem so you can kill me. Basically, he's saying, I'm aware that this confrontation in Jerusalem is going to lead to my death. But he says, I'm going to practice it anyway. I'm not going to shy away. I'm coming up anyway.
Yeah, that reminds me so much of a video I recently watched where a Latino man stood between his Latino neighbors and ICE.
Yeah.
And he confronted them and he stopped them and he said, "What are you doing?
Yep.
This is my town. This is where we live. We're all in this together. We
Yeah.
went to high school together.
Yep.
What are you doing?"
Yeah. These are my neighbors and I'm willing to stand
Yeah.
between you and them
And he
at my
says,
expense.
"I'm willing to die for this." He tells them. That's what they finally back up because he goes, "I am willing to die for this shit."
Yeah.
And that's so powerful. That is so powerful. And that is a follower of Jesus if I've ever seen one.
Yep.
And did he have a cross around his neck? No. Did he
Yeah.
grow up Christian? Probably Catholic, you know,
Yeah.
like a lot of us
Yeah.
did. But I don't think it came from that. I
Yeah.
think it came from his own level of compassion
Yeah.
and his own identity with what he views morality to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Yeah, and that's like we talked about last time. That's, Jesus's deepest humanity, is what I think of as what's divine, that ability. Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. This is, and there's a lot of sermons about this and a lot of different interpretations. For me, this is clear in the context that we're talking about it. You can't live in an extractive economy and in a generous economy. You just can't. And our economy is set up to take as much as possible from as many as possible for as few as possible. And Jesus's ethic and kingdom is just not that. Mark 12:13-17. Then they sent him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" Here we are at taxes. So this question is a trap, right? Say yes, and you betray your people, but say no, and then you face Roman punishment. So Jesus exposes the trap with this brilliant turn of phrase. He says, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and give to God the things that are God's. And the nod is that everything belongs to God, right? Caesar ultimately gets nothing, gets to keep nothing. Joe, this text, when you hear Jesus say everything belongs to God and the empire gets nothing, how do we start to translate that into what we're seeing and what our neighbors are facing now?
I don't think this is an anti-paying taxes
No.
conversation.
No, it's fair and sharing.
Even though it may sound like that when
Right.
you say Caesar gets nothing,
Yeah.
right? I love driving my car on a road that has no potholes.
Yep.
I love being able to offer our children decent education.
Yeah.
I like having air conditioning in schools and in jails and
Streetlights.
things
Oh,
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So there are advantages in paying taxes, and that's fair.
Yeah.
I feel like people getting wealthy off of our tax money is not fair. I feel like some people not having to pay the same amount of taxes that I pay is not fair.
Yeah.
And I think that at the end of the day, it really comes down to that. It really comes down to, can we do this all? Can we all get together and agree that we don't need excess?
Yeah.
We don't need to pay excess taxes. We just need to all pay our fair share so that humanity can continue to thrive, can actually thrive, because so many people haven't seen that. They haven't seen a great America ever.
Yeah.
So the idea of, thriving in what we have can only happen if we split everything a little more equally.
Yeah.
And I think everyone agrees with that.
Yeah.
One of my very best friend's dad is super duper pro-Trump. And I asked him, I said, listen, what do you pay in taxes? And he goes, I own a business. I don't pay anything in taxes.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that must be nice. Because even when I was a high school teacher, I paid almost 20% of my salary in taxes. And I said, here you are super wealthy and you're not paying taxes. Your business is thriving and you're not paying taxes. I said, isn't it more fair if we all just paid 10% in taxes?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he goes, yes, it is.
Yeah.
That would be more fair.
Yes.
If I could pay 10% so that you could drop down to 10%, I would.
Yeah.
Why? Because he's a Christian.
Yeah. Well, that you couldn't have put it any better. Jesus says extraction doesn't work. And we've got to find a way to share. And I think you're absolutely right. One of my recovery sponsors says there's two kinds of fear of not getting what you want and fear of losing what you have. And I think on the bottom, you have masses who can't believe anymore that a better life is possible because they've been so separated from wealth, and wealth has so much power. And on the other side, you've got Peter Thiel and Musk and these people with immense wealth, and they're doing everything they can to protect it so that no one can get it. And neither one can believe that this world is possible. And I think what Jesus is saying is the only way you'll believe it's possible is back to this solidarity, compassion, because you're not going to believe that the system will work just by saying, let's all do 10%, right? The bottom won't believe it, the top won't believe it. But if we actually move towards one another and start to experience people who have less than us, and people who have way more than us start to experience what we're experiencing, maybe we can start to believe, you know? And I think it's going to have to start out in these little pockets. All right, a quick note for our new listeners. In this segment, we're eventually going to bring your comments and your questions on air. Since these first few episodes are pre-recorded, we're going to pose some of the big questions that have come up in my ministry the last 15 or 20 years. We talked last week about the humanity of God. This week's posture is one that we've wrestled with in religious and organizing work. Jesus as a guide, not as a hero. In a Christianity that worships Jesus as a hero who fixes everything from above and outside, why do we need him as a guide beside us instead? I think one of my favorite, probably one of my best received Christmas Eve sermons ever was that Jesus is not Luke, he's Yoda. Jesus is not the hero of the movie. He's the one who gets the hero ready, and we're supposed to be the hero, right? Luke Skywalker's character is a whiny baby. He needs to grow up. He's not ready to be a hero, but he encounters Yoda, who's a guide, and a guide trains and shows him the way and is patient so that he can and so that we can live into our own calling. Because heroes fix things for you. Guides show you how to do the work yourself, right? Codependence is the name of having a hero. Therapy is the name of having a guide. Jesus isn't Luke, he's Yoda. Christianity turned Jesus into a hero, this divine rescuer who saves you from sin, who does it all for you. You can't do it on your own. It creates passivity, right? You pray, you wait for Jesus to fix things, you hope for intervention. You believe the right things about your hero, and then your hero saves you. It's a great story. You can understand why so many people buy into it, right? You can understand why Marvel's making billions of dollars. The issue is Jesus didn't act like that. He acted like a guide. He said, follow me, not worship me, and I'll do everything. He taught people practices, how to pray, how to share resources, how to cross barriers, how to confront power. He organized people into a movement so they could continue after he was gone. A guide says, I've walked this path. Here's what I've learned. Now you try it. I'll walk with you. Let's take some steps together. To me, this is much better news than a hero because, again, heroes create dependency. Guides create capacity. Joe, you're a guide if I've ever known one. You're an educator, in public education, but then also in your current role. When you think about what people actually need in education, healthcare, systems change in their own lives, ultimately, what's more valuable? Someone who can come in and kind of fix everything. And I know there's a lot of consultants and change companies that will come in and fix it, or guidance on how to be better themselves.
Yeah, definitely guidance. I mean, the whole idea of empowering people is to guide them and help them figure out how to help themselves.
Yeah.
As a Capricorn, I love this topic.
Yeah.
I one of my favorite memes is a little girl who's a Capricorn who makes a wish on her birthday and she goes, okay, now I made the wish. Now I have to go do the wish.
Yeah.
It's not enough to make the wish. It's not enough to pray quietly and hope that that's enough. I'm not saying I don't believe in the power of prayer.
Sure.
I just feel like it's not enough.
That's not the whole thing.
It's not the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's great to have faith, but it's even greater if you can go out and make a difference.
The prayer is the grace before the meal, but there's still a meal.
Absolutely, but there's still a meal.
You go do the work.
If that's all it is, if it's just a wish, good luck.
Yep. And that's what Jesus offers. It's not a fix from above, but here's how to practice a good life, solidarity, confronting systems, building community. And then you get together and talk about if it's working, how it's working. Jesus as a guide, not a hero.
It's also important to recognize the heroes in our society,
Yes.
right? So I can definitely look at Jesus's life and recognize that Jesus was a hero,
Yeah.
right? Like Jane Goodall was a hero,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, he didn't want to be a hero, and
Yeah.
neither did Jane Goodall.
Yes.
They just wanted to be guides. They wanted to show everyone that you too
Yeah.
can make a difference. You too can make the world better.
Yeah, one of my kind of friends and mentors, Pete, says he talks about the difference between idols and icons, and icons point past themselves and idols point to themselves. And I think that's one of the big things that Christianity missed is really thinking that Jesus is pointing to himself when he's pointing to his neighbors. The more powerful Christianity gets, the less it feels like Jesus. Cultural Christianity seems stronger than ever, financially, politically, vocally, but somehow clearly further from the life and teachings of Jesus than when it started. People are noticing this, so they're less comfortable staying in church or they're just not going. We're here looking for the way of Jesus. We're looking for a way out of this toxic Christianity. We're looking for Jesus after Christianity, and I'm really glad you're here. All right, a couple quick practices for the next 2 weeks. Practice number 1, follow the money. Track where your money goes this week. I know I hate budgeting too, but track every purchase, look at every subscription, every expense, and then ask, which systems are you embedded in? Where is extraction happening? And then maybe where is solidarity happening? Where are you shopping local and supporting? And I want you to start to notice which corporations are profiting from your spending. Notice which systems you're supporting without even thinking about it. Notice where your money flows away from your community and where it's flowing to your community. And it's not about guilt. Again, it's not about fixing it. It's not about having an answer, an explanation. It's about clarity. You can't practice an alternative economy until you see the economy that you're embedded in and that it is a part of this system. Thoughts?
Agreed.
Practice number 2, cross one barrier. Have a real conversation with someone across a real dividing line, class, race, political tribe, whatever barrier you normally maintain. Don't debate, don't convert. You just listen. I remember you went to this yoga festival and did the mountain practice. Just listen as if you can't speak. Listen to their experience of this system. I promise it will help open your eyes. And ask them, how are you experiencing economic pressure? What systems are feeling heavy to you? And maybe where do you find solidarity? And the hope is that we ask these questions and we let someone else's reality change how we see the world. That's what Jesus did. He crosses these barriers, listened to people that were excluded, and that changed how he understood God's work and what he invited other people into.
I think a lot of people struggle with how to do that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have been taught to fear other people so much that they close their eyes to people around them in need in our society, in our communities. Couple examples of how I've done that recently. I was driving home and I saw a little tiny woman carrying this big heavy grill all the way up one of our major roads around here. And I pulled over my car and I opened my trunk and I said, put that thing in my trunk and let me drive you to wherever you're going.
Yeah.
And while I drove her, I had the conversation, how are you?
Yeah.
How are you doing? What are you doing with this? And I learned so much about her life, her day-to-day, the struggle in collecting pieces of metal wherever she can to get just enough money to get toothpaste and soap and things of that nature. I have her on my list for Christmas, of who I'm going to bring a bunch of toothpaste and soap to, because it's so much easier for me to give her some of mine than it is for her to have to go from house to house looking through people's trash, trying to get metal to sell the scraps.
Yeah. And as much as there's what you did for her, there's also that human dignity of being offered a ride and being asked
Absolutely.
how you are. Just being
Exactly.
seen is
Having
so
the
powerful.
conversation. I think I started off that day in a bad place. I was down. I was depressed. I was so sad.
Yeah, I was
And
a
I
part
went
of
to
that.
yoga. I know. I went to yoga. I was so upset and I thought yoga would fix it. And oh man, it didn't that day.
Yeah.
It didn't that day. It just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And I'm driving home and I see this little lady and I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. Give it away.
Just let's do it. And just do it. And that was another thing. I did bring Jane Goodall into this because I really think she is a prophet of our time. We had the honor and the blessing to see her speak just 2 weeks before she passed away in Austin. And that was amazing. I'm so glad we did that together,
Yeah.
Ben. But one of the biggest things that Jane Goodall says, and one of the biggest messages that she had for the world was to do something.
Yeah.
Anything. What do you like? You like cats? Go to a humane society and help give those cats love, give those cats attention, help spread the word that they need homes. Anything that you can do, just go out and do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not that hard.
Everyone has been impacted by a passion or they've got a problem they want to solve. And if, just get up and go do something. And that's the hope with these practices connect to the teachings of what Jesus was actually doing and saying before Christianity. If you want to get these teachings emailed to you, go to JesusAfterChristianity.com. Next episode, Compassion is Solidarity. We're going to look at what Jesus meant by compassion and not sentiment. It's not charity from above, but suffering with. Standing alongside people being crushed, and how that solidarity reveals what the systems are hiding. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Join a listening room at roomtolisten.com. Try these practices. They will change how you see the world. Thanks to Orbis Books for partnering with us on the 50th anniversary of Albert Nolan's Jesus Before Christianity. Find that book at your local bookstores and online. This has been Jesus After Christianity. I'm Ben Collins, my wife Jo. A better understanding of Jesus and a better way to solve our problems.
We're beautiful people with messy pasts, so have no fear, no judgment here.
Jesus After Christianity operates without institutional backing. Your support makes it possible for this movement to continue and spread. You can give via PayPal at JesusAfterChristianity.com. This podcast is produced by Paper Jacket, music by Fred Wilson and Andrew Brooks and other artists, and thank you to Orbis Books. I'm Ben. Let's pay attention to what Jesus paid attention to together. Thanks for listening. Peace.